Hey class, this is Miss Wendt, and this is Cell Notes Part 3 with eukaryotic cells. So to prep for this, you need to get your notes out. I recommend colored pencils or something similar to color code and draw things. And you may want to pause the video and just review the bacteria cell that you drew before, whether that was yesterday or earlier today or whatever. Okay. So our eukaryotic cell, we're going to do very similar to our bacteria cell, but it's going to have a lot more parts to it. So let's get started. Our final product is going to look something like this. So you can see it's very full of things. So let's go. So the first thing we have here, our first part, is the cell wall. And the cell wall is the outside layer. It offers protection to a plant cell, and it gives structure and shape. Okay, so plants don't have bones, so these cell walls working as a team are what keeps trees and corn and grass standing up tall and able to capture lots of sunlight. Okay, so in our picture here, our cell wall is going to be a pretty thick layer. Now I am not going to use the color green for anything until I get to something very specific later on, okay? Whoops. All right, so plant cells tend to have a box shape. So I have kind of a square shape here, and I'm going to label it cell wall. And if you have enough space on your page, you might want to put the job right next to it. I will not have enough space on my screen, so I will not be adding the job to my picture. I would have it maybe on a separate sheet of paper right next to it. All right, so our cell wall's on the outside. Then our next thing we have is our cell membrane. That's going to be right inside our cell wall. Cell membrane also is for protection because it's in charge of letting things in and out. So it's going to try to keep bad stuff out, keep good things inside from leaking back out, and make sure that the cell has the right amount of water and salt and food and all those other things that the cell membrane can be in charge of. We want the right amount of that good stuff inside. The membrane is also going to push out waste and garbage from building up inside as well. Okay, so for our cell membrane picture, I'm going to grab something a little thinner here. Cell membrane is quite a bit thinner, but that's going to be right next to the wall. And I'll label that guy cell membrane. Okay, so these plant cells here have two layers, a cell wall and a cell membrane. Animal cells will not have a cell wall. Okay, so with that in mind, we probably should label this picture. So, whoops. Maybe down here I'll say plant cell. Okay, because with the cell wall, it is not an animal cell. This is very specifically going to be a plant cell. So I know the label is going to be kind of hidden most of the time, but it is there. All right, next thing inside. The plant cell is going to have a very large water vacuole. Oops. Stores water. And it's like a huge storage tank. Because if you think about plants in the outside, in nature, it doesn't rain every day, right? Maybe it rains on Tuesday and then it doesn't rain again for 5 or 10 days. So the plants need a way to store water up for those days where it's not raining. So all plants are going to have a large water vacuole. And I'm going to use blue for water. And this is going to take up a lot of space. And lots of times it's kind of squashed off to one side. Okay, so all of this inside here is water. And sometimes cells are 90% of their space is this water vacuole. I'm not going to do 90% of the space because I won't have enough space to write my other things. But water is a huge part of our plant cells. And when that water vacuole is full, think of it like as a big full water balloon. It pushes on the outside of that cell wall and keeps the cell wall nice and tight and straight so the plant can sit upright. If this water vacuole here is half empty, the whole structure gets kind of floppy and the plant might be wilted and kind of bent over a little bit from lack of water. So you've maybe seen that happen in your own yard or your own flower bed. Okay, so that's our huge water vacuole. Next thing we have is we have some ribosomes. These are our protein builders. And just like in our bacteria cell, they're just tiny little dots. So we're going to add some tiny little dots into our picture. Now I'm actually going to wait a minute. I'm going to add the tiny little dots in a little bit. Okay, because they can kind of fit anywhere. So I'm going to put a little star back there to remind myself I need to go back and add them in later to my picture. Okay, the next thing on my list is something we did not have in our bacteria cell, and this is a nuclear membrane. And this is a double layer of lipids. So remember we talked about lipids and carbohydrates and proteins. So here's one place in your body where you have to have lipids to survive. And there's 2 layers of lipids, and it protects and keeps the DNA safe. Okay, so there's going to be fewer things that could cause the DNA to be broken or have a mistake in it. Okay, so I'm going to add that to my picture, a nuclear membrane. Okay, and it doesn't matter where things go because everything kind of floats around. I'm just going to put it over here. And I'm kind of making it a dotted line on purpose because that way it does have little openings for things to get in and out. Okay, so I do have kind of a little opening there, but that's not going to be good for writing a label. So I'm going to change to a slightly different color for my label. So nuclear membrane. Okay. So inside that membrane is going to be our nucleus. So let's check that out here. Nucleus is our central area of DNA inside. And then I wrote down what DNA is. Okay. So inside this nuclear membrane, we are going to have DNA. And that whole thing together is called the nucleus. Okay, now remember, anytime you need more time to write, you can pause the video. But I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to draw my DNA and then kind of shade in and label the nucleus, which is the area the DNA is in. So for my DNA, let's see, I'm going to do, how about this kind of dark green? In DNA, just like in the bacteria cell, it's kind of like a big pile of string. The bacteria cell usually has 1 piece of string. As a human, you actually have 46 pieces of string in there, pieces of DNA all wrapped up. So that's pretty cool. So that is our DNA. And I'm going to shade that inside. I'm going to get, let's do a crayon. That worked pretty good yesterday. So let's do a little shading in here. And this is going to be our nucleus. So the DNA is in there and the whole thing looks kind of dark. It's kind of fun playing with all these writing tools, I gotta say. Nucleus. Right there. Right inside there. So that whole thing with the membrane of the DNA, there is some cytoplasm in there. And there's actually one more thing that we're going to add to our nucleus. So let's go back here and check out what this one last thing is. Okay, so in our nucleus we had DNA. There's also a darker area inside. And this is kind of tough because if you look at nucleus as a word, and then this guy, nucleolus, they're really similar. Like really similar. Just the ending is different. So you got to be a little cautious about these. But the bigger word, the nucleolus, the bigger word is actually the smaller organelle. This is a small organelle inside the larger nucleus. And the nucleolus has the job of building those tiny little ribosomes that we haven't drawn yet. Okay, so I'm going to need something pretty dark in there. So maybe this dark gray here. And I'm just going to draw a dark area inside there. Nucleolus. And that is the place where all these little ribosomes are being built. The second letter is supposed to be a U. It's very messy, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. So far, if we recap here, we have a blue cell wall protecting a thin red cell membrane that lets things in and out. We have a large storage of water in this water vacuole. And then we have the nucleus, which is like the manager that tells everybody what to do. Inside the nucleus is our instructions, that's our DNA. We have a nucleolus, which builds ribosomes. And we have a nuclear membrane that keeps everything inside safe. All right. So our nucleus is done now. So let's take a look at some of our other parts. We have something called endoplasmic reticulum. And everybody, I mean like college professors and textbooks and everybody abbreviates this ER, endoplasmic reticulum. And this is the highway system inside the cell. So this is how the cell is going to push things from one end to the other. If something has to go from the nucleus to a different part, or if it has to go from inside the cell to outside the cell, these are the hallways or highways or pathways that all the other cell things are going to follow to get from one place to another. So there's a ton of it in your cell. It fits up like all the empty spaces. And there's actually two types of this. Okay, so let me give you a little more info and then we're going to draw it. There is rough ER. So rough is kind of like sandpaper. So if you touch sandpaper, there's little bumps on it, it feels rough. Well, the little bumps on rough ER are the ribosome dots. And that's why we're going to draw them now with this. Okay, and because the ribosomes build proteins, rough ER is usually moving those proteins from one place to another because they're built right next to it. Okay, kind of like if you have a factory right on a highway and they build things in the factory and then the trucks take it right on the highway to some place to sell. That's exactly what's going on here. Now we also have smooth ER. And this does not have ribosomes. So usually this is pushing lipids around because lipids, if you think of like oil, would be smooth. You know, if you put baby oil on your skin, it kind of makes it all smooth and stuff. So smooth ER moves lipids around. Rough ER is going to move proteins around. Okay, so let's draw this in our cell. And these shapes just kind of go everywhere. So you can have them kind of any way you want to. Let's see, a color we have not used yet. Let's pick this, this dark red here. So a lot of ER goes from the nucleus kind of somewhere else. So I'm gonna just make some ER here. Here's a pathway that's going kind of from one place to another. Here's another pathway. Here's another pathway. And the pathways would fill everything, but I'm just going to draw like 3. Otherwise, my picture's going to get really cluttered. Okay. Now, I am going to leave this one down here with no ribosomes. So I'm going to call this one smooth ER because it has no ribosomes on it. But I'm going to add ribosomes up here. So I'm going to grab another color here. Maybe... this guy's kind of cool. And I'm going to put ribosomes all on this ER. And it gives it a bumpy appearance, kind of like sandpaper. Okay. And there's also going to be some other random ribosomes just floating randomly in other places too. So these little dots here, ribosomes, and I'm going to label one of my, they're called free floating, just like the bacteria DNA, they're just floating randomly. I'm going to label another ribosome over here to remind me that they're just the same thing. But I need to label my rough ER. So this one over here, rough ER, because that one has the ribosomes on it. Okay, so they're both ER. If you're taking a quiz, you can just call them ER. But if you're wanting to be more specific, rough has ribosomes, smooth does not. Okay. Now, we are not done yet, but if you need to watch this video in 2 parts, this is kind of a good place to stop. So I'm going to just go back to our writing here with our ER. So we're going to stop this video right here, and I will make another video to continue.